Welcome back to Optimal Bone Health with Dr. Doug. This will be our fourth video on whole body vibration. This is going to be my conclusion to the interview that I did with Dr. Rubin, as well as the interview that I did with Dr. Conviser. I am surprised and shocked how controversial this space is. I actually am re-recording this conclusion because I had additional studies that were sent my way and really had to dig into some of the details of these things to come up with the final conclusion here. So there's no surprise in my mind why there's so much confusion around what to do. Should you buy a plate? What plate should you buy? What criteria are we looking for? Because it was really hard for me to dig into all of the details and come up with a final conclusion. So stick around. We're going to go through all of this, all the details. We're going to talk about some studies, and we will at the end have some recommendations for you. So stick around. I'll see you then. All right, so in this final video on whole body vibration, I want to talk a little bit about what my take on the interview with Dr. Rubin was, with Dr. Conviser, and kind of conclude those. And then I really want to dig into some of the additional research that I found as I was looking for how to come up with a conclusion on what to recommend for my patients and ultimately for you guys on YouTube, based off of the evidence, based off of the recommendations from experts. But in this space, the experts so clearly are conflicting in their recommendations. You should see the back and forth through my email. It's been really remarkable. The value here is that what I'm finding in my patients is that we really need to have something in addition to strength training. We need to have a comprehensive program. Strength training absolutely should be a part of that, but we need some kind of impact. And that impact appears to be, could it be an impact program? And the answer is yes. If you look at the Lift More trial, look at the impact there. Osteogenic loading through something like OsteoStrong or biodensity, and that certainly is a potential role for generating the stimulus for bone to grow. But it also looks like vibration and whole body vibration could be a component of that. And so one of those three things I think really should be part of a comprehensive program to build bone, in addition to the diet, in addition to the training, in addition to the supplementation, hormones, et cetera. So that's why this is such an important thing, because this is something that people could have at their home. This is something that people could have at their disposal on a regular basis. We'll talk about some of the different models, some of the different cost things that are out there, because certainly that's something to consider as well. All right, so a quick review of the interview that I did with Dr. Rubin from the company Marodyne. He's the founder of the company. He has done the research that supports the device, and the specifics of those devices are important here. So let's just talk about it real quick. Both the Marodyne device and the PowerPlate device both work on a similar frequency, which is the speed at which the device moves. It's around 30 hertz or 30 to 35 up and down per second is my understanding of that. The amount that it moves, the distance that it moves, is called the displacement. And the displacement is measured generally in millimeters. Now, Marodyne, though, will measure theirs in microns because the amount of displacement is so small. So they use a 50 to 200 micron displacement of up and down, and there's 1,000 microns per millimeter, which means that 200 microns is 0.2 millimeters, and 50 would be 0.05 millimeters, which is obviously very small. The third measurement that we need to look at here is G's, so the gravitational pull. So this is called acceleration, which can be really confusing, but we're looking at how many G's these devices can generate. And this becomes very important when we start talking about the safety. So the Marodyne device generates around 0.4 G's is what they say on their website, plus or minus 20%. So a little bit under, a little bit over, but 0.4 G's. And you'll see that other devices are going to be around 2 to 3 G's, some devices upwards of 7, 8 or more. Some devices have the capacity to produce even more, but there is certainly a threshold of safety, which we're going to have to talk about. So in my interview with Dr. Rubin, we talked about how his research shows that you can really slow down bone loss. He wasn't as optimistic about it helping to build bone, although I'm going to talk about his studies and what they've shown, but we definitely showed the ability to slow down bone loss, particularly in children, particularly to improve bone healing. But specifically for this population in the bone health channel, we're talking about generally pre, peri, and postmenopausal women and men that have osteoporosis and are going to be kind of older than that children cohort in the bone healing study. So really, I want to know, does the Marodyne device reverse bone loss? Does it build bone in a postmenopausal woman? That's sort of the group that I want to see this in. And so you can see this in a couple of different studies. Our first study here was a review paper, again, by Dr. Rubin as one of the authors from 2019. And he kind of goes through all these things. And if you're a science geek, this is a good study to read about all the different details of whole body vibration. But if you want to get to the meat of the results, we have to go to our second study. So this is a 2004 study. We're going to talk about this a couple of times today because it keeps coming back up. Now, some interesting things about this study, which is it was on the population that we were very interested in. So 70 women were enrolled in the study, and they were looking specifically at the device, the Marodyne style device. So a quote unquote high frequency, according to the study, around 30 to 35 hertz, but then also that very, very small amplitude or displacement. So what they found in this study is that there was no change in the intervention group. In other words, that the device didn't work. But they go on to talk about the fact that they had compliance issues. And so when you look at people that actually stood on the device, then it looked like if you were to extrapolate those data that they would see improvement. Furthermore, if you were to subdivide the results into different populations and you look at subgroup analysis, then you would actually also see benefit in the spine in thinner women. Now, the challenge here is that we have to be careful when we start doing subgroup analysis in studies because you can get misled because there are other factors potentially at play. This study also struggled with a lot of people dropping out. So that group of 70 actually went down to 46 when they started looking at who to actually include in the statistics. So there's a lot of statistical challenges here. Apparently it was challenging for the people in the study to actually stand on the device. And it's just kind of an unfortunate side effect of doing studies like this, especially if there's a placebo, because they might feel like they're on the placebo and then they don't want to participate in the study. So while that's somewhat convincing, okay, yes, maybe it can help with spine, bone mineral density, and in lighter women. Is that going to really help the entire population? I think the answer is no. Fortunately, what they also show in this study and others he talks about in his review paper is that it is a very safe version. And we'll talk more about safety later, but the Marodyne does appear to be very safe. No downsides in that study. So I wanted to know, after I did this interview, are there any other studies that use a similar device? And the fact is that there actually is. So there's a 2011 study that used a very similar device, 202 postmenopausal women with, I think just with osteopenia, but with some bone issues. They were also given calcium and vitamin D. They did the device for 10 minutes a day, and they had really three groups, but one did do 30 hertz or frequency the same, again, 10 minutes a day. They also had some challenge with adherence, but most people either did it not at all or they did it all the time. So even though the average was 80%, it was actually easy to work around from a statistical perspective. The results of this study were similar to the results of the Rubin study from 2004, which was there was no impact of the device. There was no trend at all on bone mineral density, in that their conclusion was that whole body vibration for 12 months did not alter BMD or bone structure in postmenopausal women who were also receiving calcium and vitamin D supplementation. So that is challenging. And one of the things that I found since then is a new meta-analysis that also includes some of these studies. And so meta-analysis can be a very powerful tool. It's a way to accumulate a lot of data into one place, and this can be a great way to look at a lot of science at one time. This is really challenging for me to talk about because I struggle, because so many people that are in this community, in our YouTube community, leaving wonderful comments, say great comments about studies. They're reading studies. It's really an amazing community. But this is one of the things where if I hadn't really dug into the statistics of this, if I hadn't really looked at the actual studies themselves, gone behind paywall, paid hundreds of dollars to look at numerous articles, I wouldn't have been able to see through what appears to be some significant bias in the study for me. So this is really challenging for me to say, but what I'm going to say is that I think the study is really flawed. But let me talk about why. So this looks really good, right? 2023 meta-analysis. It was published in Osteoporosis International. which is the publication of the National Osteoporosis Foundation, which is now the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation in the US, and the European Foundation for Osteoporosis. So this sounds like, man, this is going to be a really great study, and anything that they say we should probably believe. They use some very strict criteria for including studies. And if you're not familiar with how these things work, they will do an initial search. They'll find a whole bunch of studies that meet a certain criteria, and then they will eliminate them based off of the inclusion criteria of the study. So they ended up with 23 in the systematic review and 20 in the meta-analysis. And so they did a good job of this study of trying to group them in logical ways. So they were trying to group them in essentially like the Marodyne device versus the PowerPlate device. And then they had some other groups as well. And that's one of the things that made it so confusing, is that they had so many groups. Okay, so the two groups that I'm most interested in are the high frequency, low amplitude, like Marodyne, and the high frequency, high amplitude, like PowerPlate. So what they found is that the high frequency, low amplitude devices do potentially, this is what they said, show benefit to the lumbar spine in certain subgroups, which is what I said earlier, right? But remember, that's only if you extrapolate the data. And then the high frequency, high magnitude, or high amplitude, or high displacement, all the same thing, devices like PowerPlate are beneficial for a bone mineral density perspective to the spine, the trochanter, and Ward's triangle, which is an area of the proximal femur just below the femoral neck. But they state that there's lower quality evidence. And so this is what they say in their conclusion. They say that at this time, considering the high quality of evidence, it is possible to recommend whole body vibration, or WBV, using high frequency, about 30 hertz, low magnitude, 0.3 Gs, which is the same as the Marodyne device, and high cumulative dose, about 7,000 minutes, which takes a year, to improve lumbar spine, BMD, in postmenopausal women. Other parameters, although promising, need to be better investigated, considering when applicable the safety of the participants, especially in vibrations with higher magnitudes greater than 1 G. So here's my concern with this, which is that when I go back and look and see how many studies were included in the high frequency, higher amplitude or magnitude versus how many were included in the high frequency, low magnitude, I'm really concerned that this isn't an accurate representation of the data. There's only one study on the Marodyne-like devices by Dr. Rubin himself included in here that showed hip and spine. The other study did not look at hip and spine BMD, only showed tibia, which they didn't even mention. Those are the only two studies that they ended up including. And yet they eliminated all the others because of their concern for quality, but something has to be said about the quantity. There are so many studies that are demonstrating the benefit, and it's a much higher benefit, more in places that we're interested in, like the hip. Also, they talk about their fear of fracture, and specifically they mention we should be concerned about the impact of using these devices because of the imminent fracture in people that have osteoporosis. I'm paraphrasing. But the thing is, they go through the safety and they say, in all these studies, there was never a fracture. In fact, there's never been a reported fracture of being on a device. When I went back and talked to Dr. Conviser about this, he works with people that have severe osteoporosis and has thousands of hours, thousands of patients, never a fracture. So again, I feel like there's something going on here from a safety perspective, from a motivation perspective. I don't know exactly what it is, but their conclusion is that high frequency, low amplitude is the best. But my concern is that I think they're missing the big picture here, which is way more studies will show value of the higher amplitude devices. So more to come on that. Before we get there, let me ask you this. If you haven't already, would you mind clicking that subscribe button? It'll help us to help other people. The more people that subscribe, the more likely we are to be recommended to people who are looking for bone health solutions. And I hope that you think that this is one of those and you like them to see that. Secondly, if you haven't already and you want to see how we put all of this information together for people, consider joining our free masterclass. The link is in the description below. It's an hour-long live masterclass where I go through everything that we're doing with our patients from A to Z, and then answer questions for a few minutes. So if that sounds like something that would be good for you, take a look for that link in the description below. All right, so let's talk about the other group of devices, the PowerPlate-like devices. So these are devices that, again, have similar frequency, so 30 to 35 hertz, and they will move up and down around 2 millimeters of displacement or magnitude, whichever you want to call it. They will generate around 2 to 3 Gs of acceleration. So this is sort of the in-between group. And when you listen to my interview with Dr. Rubin, he clearly says that he feels like these devices are dangerous and that you should not have that much acceleration, and that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that we shouldn't be using these types of devices. But yet when you read all the other literature, you talk to other experts in the space, they completely disagree with that. So we're going to get into some of those things. When it comes to the evidence on the bigger displacement devices like PowerPlate, there are more studies like that meta-analysis demonstrated. Several of them are on the PowerPlate website. Some of them are not. I've reviewed several of them and I have some for you here. One of the things I like about the PowerPlate webpage on evidence is that there are studies on arthritis and cognition and strength, so many things. So I think it's really an interesting review of the data there. So here's a couple of studies from there. So this is a 2003 study, kind of same time era as the Rubin study. And basically what this study is looking at is 70 postmenopausal women, age 58 to 74, in a 24-week program. So 24 weeks, not very long. They were divided into 3 groups. There was a vibration group, a resistance training group, and a control group. And the vibration group did some exercises on the device. That's not really relevant. The control group did nothing, and the resistance group did exercises outside of the device. And then what they measured is they measured hip bone mineral density using DEXA, and then again at 6 months. And the results showed that the vibration group experienced no side effects. Again, from a safety perspective, that's no side effects. They had improved isometric and dynamic muscle strength compared to baseline, but also compared to the other groups. So they actually did show some benefit of strength over the other groups. And then additionally, the vibration group showed significant increase in hip bone mineral density by almost 1% compared to both the control group and the resistance group. So the resistance group and the control group lost about 0.5% in 6 months, which is about statistically average, right? That's what you would expect. So, 1% in 6 months, not that much, but it's positive, right? It's headed in the right direction and it was consistent among that group. So I think that's really important. I have another meta-analysis that also looked at similar devices, and this is a 2016 study. And what it shows is that there is some controversy. Not all the studies that they looked at showed benefit, but their conclusion is that displacement around 2 millimeters that results in 3 Gs of force, 10 minutes a day, is adequate for improving bone mineral density, and that you don't need to do any exercises on the machine. So you don't have to do anything. You certainly can. I like doing it, but you don't have to. Just 10 minutes static per day is all you have to do, and you can improve your bone mineral density that way. Real quick aside on that though. When I talk to people that are using these devices, I find that most of them in general will use an on-off approach, meaning that they will have 30 to 60 seconds of exposure and then come off for 30 to 60 seconds and then do that 5 times in that 10 minutes of exposure. So there's still probably some things that we're learning, we're figuring out, but that's what I hear most people are doing is that 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off, something like that to help to give your body a little bit of break in between the exposures. All right. So then what about the risks? If we are consistent that the 2 to 3 millimeters of displacement is probably the right amount of exposure, is it safe? So when I look this up, the study that I find was actually written again by Dr. Rubin. So this is a 2013 study that shows that occupational exposure to vibration can cause all kinds of problems: back pain, blurred vision, hearing loss, chronic nerve, vascular damage. And they talk a lot in this study about these human tolerance limits. They go on to cite and talk a lot about the International Organization for Standardization, or the ISO, and they have some criteria around vibration in the commercial workplace. And so one of the challenges in this study is that basically they're saying that the limitations that are placed around a commercial workplace should be applied then to the therapeutic use of a vibration device, which is obviously controversial. Another thing that's interesting about this study is that they talk about these specific devices from PowerPlate. They actually label them in the study. And they say that if you measure the displacement and the frequency, that it should be delivering 8 to 9 Gs of acceleration, which is much more than the PowerPlate company would say, which is 2 to 3 Gs of acceleration. So this puts us in a really awkward situation because I know the CEO of both companies and they both tell me what their companies do, what their plates do, and how well made they are and how consistent they are. And so, man, I kind of don't know who to believe here. But what I will say is that when you talk about the ISO standards, you're talking about chronic exposure of vibration, and you're talking about it in a commercial setting. meaning that they are not there for any therapeutic benefit. So there's no risk-benefit equation to be had. So it's a very lopsided equation, right? So compare that then to, or let me give you an example. Compare somebody driving like a backhoe and the thing's vibrating at 30 hertz with whatever, 1 millimeter of displacement, and they sit on that thing for 6 hours. That's a different situation than standing on a device from a therapeutic perspective for 10 minutes or off and on 60 seconds at a time. So I understand that this is all we have to go on is from a risk perspective, but I don't know that it's actually a fair comparison, and I don't think we can say that these devices are dangerous as a result of this. I do hear some concerns from patients and followers and YouTube comments around this concern around retinal detachment, vertigo, dizziness, can I get on this thing if I have a joint replacement, et cetera. And the answer is all these questions is always ask your doctor, right? Like ask your doctor about your situation before you get on one of these devices. I can tell you that from my perspective, for me as an orthopedic surgeon who used specific devices that the bone actually grew into rather than cemented into place types of implants, for those devices where ingrowth is the goal, probably vibration would be beneficial. But again, ask your doctor, because if you are having an issue, if it doesn't heal well or whatever, they're going to know and they're going to be able to tell you whether or not you should consider doing that. The other thing I wanted to reiterate is that in all of the studies, and I've looked at, I don't know how many papers now, always look in the side effects, the risks, associated with the intervention, and it has always been nothing. If it's anything, it is a headache or, dizziness actually, I think came up a couple of times, but no fractures, no retinal detachment, no issues with joints, no issues with arthritis, et cetera. So I feel like the safety concern is a little bit blown out of proportion, but that brings me back to the less expensive devices. So some of the feedback I get is that the Marodyne device and the PowerPlate devices cost more than other devices. Totally true. But if you think about the mechanics of these things, you think about how well they have to be made to deliver precisely that 2 millimeters, or in the case of Marodyne, 0.05 millimeters. I mean, that is some very, very precision mechanics. So if you're getting a less expensive device, I would be concerned about what is it actually delivering? Because I do believe that if there's too much acceleration, you definitely could hurt yourself, right? Vibration does have the potential to be dangerous. So we really should focus on the devices that we know what they're doing. Additionally, the devices that are less expensive are going to use a teeter-totter-like mechanism. So they're just less expensive to make. It's basically the platform does this, versus both the Marodyne and the PowerPlate devices, the whole thing goes up and down. They use different mechanics to do that. The PowerPlate device has a three-dimensional rotating platform that does that. But essentially, the whole thing is moving up and down. And that's going to deliver the same amount of displacement. Doesn't matter if you're standing out really far wide on the device or if you're standing with your feet right beside each other, you're going to get the same. On a teeter-totter, the further out you get, the higher that displacement is. So it's really hard to tell somebody, you have to stand 8 inches apart, and if you go an inch in any direction, then the G's are going to increase by this amount. It's just really hard to know. So my concern is from a safety perspective using less expensive devices. So in conclusion, this is a shockingly controversial space. And I don't like saying that papers seem to be written incorrectly, but I really can't get behind that meta-analysis. I just can't wrap my mind around the way that they did the calculation and why they eliminated so many studies to then show that this one study by the author who founded a company who sells his product and has potential bias, why that would be the only paper that they would present out of all those papers as the only thing that you should consider when talking about whole body vibration. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I just wish there were other papers that concluded that. So anyway, I think that whole body vibration can improve bone mineral density. I think that it needs to be a part of a bigger picture. It needs to be part of a comprehensive program. It appears to be relatively safe as long as you are getting what we think you're getting. There are other potential benefits in circulation, strength, cognition, detox, etc. So then when it comes down to which device to get, I would recommend one of two things. I think for most people, the PowerPlate style devices with that 2 to 3 millimeters of displacement is going to give you the best, most powerful that you want to tolerate, most powerful vibration that is going to have more studies supporting it improving your bone mineral density. So PowerPlate, for example, has home devices that you can use daily, 10 minutes, 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off. And I think you could likely do that safely. Again, I'm not giving any recommendations, but this is what I'm telling my patients to do. If you have a lot of concern around fracture, retinal detachment, joints, whatever, the Marodyne device, that style device, has probably a better safety profile, if you can say that, knowing that the other one doesn't really have any concerns that are present in the literature. But the lower amplitude device would have a better safety profile. If you are very concerned, you could start there and then work your way up. So I hope that makes sense. So if you're interested in either of those devices, take a look at the description below. We have a code for 20% off of the PowerPlate devices. The code is OBH, Optimal Bone Health. And the Marodyne code is in the description on YouTube as well. And we'll have that in the show notes for the podcast. That's all I have on this. If you haven't already, please consider joining our Bone Foundations course for another way to look at how we put things together. So the Masterclass is us doing it in an hour. The Bone Foundations course is 10 or more modules at this point. I'm going through all the things in more detail. So if you want to check that out, it's also totally free. Just follow the link in the description below. But for those that are listening, it's optimalbonehealth.com/bonus. And you will be able to get access to the Bone Foundations course, all those modules, the workbook, the nutrition guides, the free ebook that we have available for everybody. And it also gives you a free month of our HealthSpan Nation. So if you haven't already joined HealthSpan Nation, please come join us for our weekly Q&A, a private members-only community, discounts for affiliate products and services, and a content vault coming Q1 of 2024. So really excited about that. That's all I have for you today. I'll see you on the next video.